Mode 5, the Mixolydian scale. This is the fifth in the series of tutorials we've been looking at. This now takes us well over the halfway mark, and after this scale you'll only have two more scales to learn before you know all the modal scales. So far we've looked at the Ionian or the major scale, the Dorian scale, the Phrygian scale and the Lydian scale. The scale we're looking at today is the Mixolydian scale, and it's a little different from the scales we've looked at so far in that there are three ways to play it. But if you don't know any Mixolydian scales so far, don't worry, you only have to learn one of these. The scale we're looking at is the G Mixolydian scale, and the reason we can have three different scales with the same name is that they all start and finish on the G, and they all have the same pattern. Even though the shape is completely different, they share the same pattern, and this makes them Mixolydian scales. Looking at this chart here, you can see how each of the modal scales has a different interval or semitone pattern, and the pattern for the Mixolydian scale is 2-2-1-2-2-1-2. Right, let's narrow down our three scales to two to start with. These two scales are the same shape and the same pattern, and one starts on the open string position and one starts on the 12th string position, so they're an octave apart. We'll look at the 12th fret position one first, because this is barred, and therefore it can be moved up and down the neck and transposed more easily than the open position version of the same scale. So if you are going to choose just one of these scales to learn, I suggest this is the one to choose, because it's far more versatile. Right, let's learn to play the G Mixolydian scale barred in the 12th fret. Firstly, play the 15th fret of the bottom E string with the 4th finger. Play the 12th fret of the A string with the 1st finger. Play the 14th fret of the A string with the 3rd finger. Play the 15th fret of the A string with the 4th finger. Play the 12th fret of the D string with the 1st finger. Play the 14th fret of the D string with the 3rd finger. Play the 15th fret of the D string with the 4th finger. Play the 12th fret of the G string with the 1st finger. Play the 14th fret of the G string with the 3rd finger. Play the 12th fret of the B string with the 1st finger. Play the 13th fret of the B string with the 2nd finger. Play the 15th fret of the B string with the 4th finger. Play the 12th fret of the top E string with the 1st finger. Play the 13th fret of the top E string with the 2nd finger. Finally, play the 15th fret of the top E string with the 4th finger. Let's see and hear that played again more quickly with a metronome, up and down the neck. Okay, now let's look at the G Mixolydian scale in the open position. Firstly, play the 3rd fret of the bottom E string with the 3rd finger. Play the open A string. Play the 2nd fret of the A string with the 2nd finger. Play the 3rd fret of the A string with the 3rd finger. Play the open D string. Play the 2nd fret of the D string with the 2nd finger. Play the 3rd fret of the D string with the 3rd finger. Play the open G string. Play the 2nd fret of the G string with the 2nd finger. Play the open B string. Play the first fret of the B string with the first finger. Play the third fret of the B string with the third finger. Play the open top E string. Play the first fret of the top E string with the first finger. And finally, play the third fret of the top E string with the third finger. Now, let's see and hear that scale played again more quickly up and down the neck with a metronome. In this tutorial, I've put the 3 different versions of the G Mixolydian scale in order of priority, and obviously this one's the last. However, it can be a useful scale because you change positions halfway through. So, let's learn to play the G Mixolydian scale from the 2nd fret bar position. Play the 3rd fret of the bottom E string with the 2nd finger. Play the 5th fret of the bottom E string with the 4th finger. Play the 2nd fret of the A string with the 1st finger. Play the 3rd fret of the A string with the 2nd finger. Play the 5th fret of the A string with the 4th finger. Play the 2nd fret of the D string with the 1st finger. Play the 3rd fret of the D string with the 2nd finger. Play the 5th fret of the D string with the 4th finger. Play the 2nd fret of the G string with the 1st finger. Play the 4th fret of the G string with the 3rd finger. Play the 5th fret of the G string with the 4th finger. Play the 3rd fret of the B string with the 1st finger. Play the 5th fret of the B string with the 3rd finger. Play the 6th fret of the B string with the 4th finger. Finally, play the 3rd fret of the top E string with the 1st finger. Now, as usual, let's see that done again more quickly up and down the neck with a metronome. These scales may seem like hard work to learn, and I agree, they are. However, don't put yourself under any unnecessary time restraints to learn them. These scales can last you the rest of your life, so therefore, if it takes you a year or two to memorise all of them, it's well worth that time spent. Just spread them out amongst your normal practice routine and between other tunes you might be learning in order to make it more pleasant and not to overwhelm yourself with too many scales at any one time. At this point, I'd like to add a little bit of extra information about the Mixolydian scale you might find useful. I'm aware that this tutorial will be being watched by people of all levels, so if you find this bit a little difficult and you don't understand it, really don't worry about it. We'll go into it properly in a more simple form when we do the tutorials on chord theory and songwriting. If you look at the semitone pattern for the Ionian or major scale, and the semitone pattern for the Mixolydian scale, you'll notice they're more or less identical. The only place there's a difference is just before the end, where the Ionian scale goes 2-1 and the Mixolydian scale goes 1-2. Now, the only real difference this makes to the scale is that the 7th note is dropped by a semitone. So, to explain this in another way to make it completely clear, the Mixolydian scale is exactly the same as the Ionian scale except for the 7th note, which is dropped by a semitone. Normally, this information isn't very interesting and isn't very useful. However, if you apply it to the theory behind the dominant 7th chord, it becomes quite interesting. Because the dominant 7th chord is the triad, or the 1st, 3rd and 5th note of a major scale, and the 7th note of a minor scale. Now this can be quite confusing and quite difficult to explain. So an easier way of thinking about the dominant 7th chord is that it's derived from the Mixolydian scale. So to get a dominant 7th chord from the Mixolydian scale, we take the 1st, 3rd and 5th note of the Mixolydian scale, which is a major triad, and then add the 7th note of the Mixolydian scale, which is the equivalent of a major 7th note flattened by a semitone, or a minor 7th. All of this leads to an interesting side effect, in that when using the dominant 7th chord, or the 7th chord, you can quite often improvise using the Mixolydian scale over the top of it, providing you're in the same key. And this means the Mixolydian scale can actually be quite useful. From the example I've just played, you could hear that the G Mixolydian scale sounds really good with the G dominant 7th chord. However, you must have also noticed that it sounded really good when it resolved back to the tonic chord, or the root chord, and in this case that was the C major. The ebooks for all these lessons are available at www.ebooksforguitar.com. The link is down below in the description. And if you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to like, subscribe and enable notifications so you'll know when I upload new tutorials.